Hello guys, Moonlit here. Today we're going to be talking about how to invite people in LFG. I've made this video in the past, but I wasn't really, comfortable with the quality. So I'm going to make a new one with, better production value, but still not that much better. And first of all, I got this little trinket here today, so pretty good. This trinket is busted for anyone who's watching this in the future and doesn't know what people are running these days, but yeah, I got it, and my DK is stacked right now. She's only missing the Fractalist trinket, but I'm not gonna be talking about this. The reason why I wanted to make this video is because I'm gonna list a key right now, and let me just quickly change to blood so people actually apply, because I don't have IO as DPS. But so this video is going to be about how you can look at logs and Warcraft logs and things like that in order to maximize your key success rate. So over time, when you apply, when you're applied to a key, or when you are, hosting your own key, this works for whichever type of key you're running. And what I mean by this is if you're looking at keys that other people are hosting, or if it's your own key. But practically speaking, once you do this with your own key, because the reason is because if you break the key, you're stuck with a lower level key, and that really sucks because you have to get it up again. And people that are running lower level keys are usually not the same quality of players that are running higher keys. So you really want to make sure that you have your odds stacked with you, and this is how I'm going to show you how to actually look at these people. So if this is your first time inviting people and pushing high keys, if you're doing 10s, it doesn't really matter, 12s as well, as long as the person has decent eye level, you can pretty much just destroy the key and still time it, and it's chill. But in higher keys, you really have to look out for. So usually players, they only look at the rating aspect of the keys, and they only see the number, right? And they see the keys that the person has done, and they think that big IO means the probability of that person timing the key is higher, which usually, most of the time, that's correct, but practically it's not always like that. And in a situation where you're hosting your own keys, you don't want to you don't want to create a situation where you are sacrificing your keys for a mistake you've done when you are inviting people that are applying. So the way that you actually look at people and decide whether or not to invite them is by, first of all, mousing over them and looking at the statistic that the atoms are going to show you. First of all, I'm using Rated.io, and I really suggest using this atom to invite people. And you can see that this person, for example, since the time that I've updated this video, he's done 11 keys from 12 to 14. So he has some experience, but this is a 14. His highest 14 is an EDA, right? A Necodome. So if I actually shift and look at him, and my Rated.io is updated, this needs to be updated. If your Rated.io is not updated, you're not going to be able to see the keys that the person made, because this is something that saves the information on the atom itself. It's client side, it's not server side, which means that if you didn't update, you're not going to be looking at up-to-date values. So when you're looking at the Rated.io information, you can see that this person, if I shift click and look at him on the right side there, I can see his best runs by dungeon, right? So I can see that he's done 4 14s, 1 13, and 3 12s. If people are pushing, usually these numbers are not going to be 100% correct, because I mean, if you've done one key that's higher than your best, then again, you have to update the add-on to see. But this gives you a pretty good detail of how that person, what's the experience like for that person. And you have to understand as well that this value is like, oh my god, he's doing 14, so he should be good for this 14. Dungeons, they are not tuned like 100% correctly. They're not balanced like 100% balanced, which means that some dungeons are difficult and some dungeons are easier. So for example, he timed a street in an EDA at 14. These keys this season, they're considered free keys. They're not really complex. There's not a lot of risk going on as long as as people are doing like normal routes, it should be good. But you should be looking at the harder keys, right? So I should be looking at Flood in this season, right? I'm talking about season 3 of War Within here, but this applies to every season. You have to understand which dungeons are harder and which dungeons are easier, so you can like make a call based on this. And then you can see that this guy he has timed Flood 14, which is a specifically hard key to time, so that's pretty good. And he timed Arakara, which is also like a midway key. It's not that hard, but it's not that simple as well. There's a lot of things to mess up. And the second hardest key after Flood, in my opinion, I mean that varies from people to people, is Priory, and he timed a 13 Priory, right? So using this guy as an example, if I right click, you're gonna see that I have a Warcraft logs option here called copy WCL URL, and I have the Radar.io options. The Radar.io options for this video, for the purposes of this video, is not going to be that important. I'm going to focus on the Warcraft logs option here, because the reason why I was doing it on the last video is because the Radar.io profile had a linked account to Warcraft logs. Since the newer versions of the game, people updated add-ons in order to show the Warcraft logs URL straight up. So I'm gonna copy the URL, so it's gonna show up here, and I'm gonna Control C, and then we'll go to the actual Warcraft logs. So this is the important part, right? When you're looking at people and they have like, good, like it appears like they have good progression. The things that you have to look out for are like the statistics, right? So this guy, he says he's a bumper, but the thing is that he single-chested Dawn, Gambit, and Halls. This is sketchy because Gambit is a specifically extremely easy key and has a lot of time. So you should easily, even with low eye level, double chest a Gambit. Now, you could make the argument that it's not his fault, it's the tank's fault because of the route, or other people are making mistakes. That's fine. You are allowed to think like that. There's no issue to think like that. But for most of the time, this is sketchy. So if you look at somebody's profile and they don't have a single double chest 12, I would consider like investigating a bit further before inviting. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna investigate this person further. Now, obviously, before I go into this, I have to say there's there's like a lot of people applying to the key, so you're not going to be able to do it fast. So you have to look like fast, right? For example, this guy, let's see if we have good examples. Like this guy's friend right here that has 3250, he double chested the street 14. That's pretty good, and he timed an ADA 15. This guy is overqualified for this dungeon, right? So these are the types of thing that you don't even waste time checking Warcraft logs. You can just invite him because he's good for this dungeon. But everything else, like if you really want to DK and there's no good DKs around, you should be investigating a bit further. So let's jump right into Warcraft logs. So this guy says he's a pumper, and DK specifically, they are fairly easy to like do damage unless you have bad trinkets or bad stats. The rotation wise, it's a very like easy spec, so he shouldn't have issues logging well in heroic, for example, right? So let's take a look. Let's actually see his profile, and you can see that on heroic he's logging only blues, and he has 2 kills in some bosses, which means that he has more opportunities to do the boss and actually do a lot of damage. Now, if you're looking at the log like alone, You're gonna be like, ah, that's not a lot. But maybe the reason why he's logging so bad is because he only did heroic on the start of the season and he didn't have much eye level, and that's completely fine because the log that shows here is not the eye level percent log. I'm going to explain what that is when we actually look at a log. But the log that is important is the eye level percent log, which it doesn't show here. So this is the damage overall, which means that this is compared to everybody else in that spec, right? So in Frost DK's, he logged 71%, which means that he was the top 35% of 39% of this specific boss. So he was on top of 71% of everybody else, right? So if I go and actually look at the logs, he has 2 kills. He has 1 kill where he did 3.7 million DPS with 709 eye level, and another kill that he was 714 and he logged 71. This is the overall log, and why is this important? Because of your eye level, it doesn't matter if you have, you know, if you're logging 71 or not. What matters is that because of the way that gearing works, if you have a lot of eye level, even if you're really bad, you're going to out DPS somebody at the same spec if they have like 10 eye levels less than you, right? So this is sketchy, is what I'm trying to say here. So what you have to do right now is that you click on the log itself, and it's going to show the damage breakdown or everybody that, you know, did damage in this first kill right here, right? So you can see that this guy, what was his name again? Tuesday? Yeah. So he logged 36 eye level percent, which is horrible. And you can see that he was doing bad because first of all, his uptime on the boss was 99%, which means that like almost all of the time he was dealing damage, but he just wasn't doing enough DPS. You can argue that this, I mean, the reason why logging bad happens is because there's multiple reasons why, and one of the main reasons is that you're using the wrong talents. Maybe he's using Mythic Plus talents here, and this has a huge like implication with 11%. Maybe he died. There's so many things that go into this. But looking at this, like if I look at this first glance, if I'm doing 14s here, and like the second that I see this, I just don't even invite this guy. But in order to actually explain how Warcraft log works, we're going to deep dive a little bit more into this. So this is obviously not that important because this is raid, which means that this is not the same as doing Mythic Plus. Some people are just better at Mythic Plus. I do damage in Mythic Plus than on anything else. So let's check his Mythic Plus stats. So if I go here on Manaforge Omega, you can see that there is the seasons for every Mythic Plus. So if I click on the current season, you can see that he has some logs that are high over here. The thing is, these logs, they're fake. Why they're fake? Because these logs, they default to points, which makes sense because, you know, Mythic Plus is something so reliant on routes, like doing damage in Mythic Plus is so reliant on routes in your teammates that doing high damage and logging good parsers is completely like, it's not something that you can do it yourself alone. You actually have to have the stars aligned to do that because you have to have a good team, people not dying, you know, good routes around your CDs and stuff like that. But still, this gives you a better like understanding. So what you do here is that, oh my god, this guy logged a 95 on Gambit, right? So he's good. Well, if we click on the Gambit, and this is the very important part, you can see that some logs they source as leaderboard, and some logs they source as log. If it says leaderboard, it means that you can't access the log and you can't see like anything about the log. You can see the points that he has gained and how many parses there are, but in terms of damage, in terms of everything else, just it doesn't show anything. So this only works if the source is log. So this 95 that he logged on points was logged. So if we click this, we can actually see how well he did on the dungeon, and you can see that he logged 37 key percent, 32 key percent. I mean, it's horrible considering that he's 713. Now I'm going to explain to you how logs on dungeons actually work. So First of all, I have to explain what I mentioned earlier. Um, Doing good logs is 70% your damage and your performance and your offensive cooldown commitment, which means that like if you're committing the cooldowns to good pulls, that's 70% of the reason why you log well. 15% is how the tank is pulling, and if he's pulling around those CDs, and the other 15% is, you know, how good the other people from your group are. Because if they're doing high damage, then the key gets finished a lot faster, and because they finished a lot faster, your DPS gets bloated. It means that your DPS goes higher, right? So this guy on a this is a 14 level gambit, right? He logged 32. So this parse that you thought was good, this is the point parse. This parse is only comparing with people that did other key levels, which means that point wise, obviously you're going to log high if you do a high key, because the majority of the player base is going to log keys doing at much lower level dungeons. So this means nothing, actually nothing. This only shows you that that person logged well point wise because they gained more points at the end of the key, because he was like doing a higher key and he timed a key that was worth more points. But performance wise, this is worthless. You actually ignore this. Um, and the other thing that you have to look for, and the thing that is actually important, is the key percent. So the key percent is, I've explained this in other videos, but the way that I explained it was very bad, so I'm going to re-explain it now. The way that it works is like this. Everybody else that has played your spec in your class, so for this instance, this Frost DK, they're going to be competing against each other in that specific key range, which means that in a 14, if there's 100 people that do the 14 and you do, you know, above 90% of the damage that people were doing in that 14 compared to everybody else, then you log 90 key percent level, which means that you're doing 90% of parse key percentage compared to that specific key, like related to that specific key, I mean. So this guy, for instance, this brewmaster here, compared to all the brews that did Tazavesh Solia's Gambit 14, he logged 91. So he did very well in this dungeon. Um, the reason why his log here is higher is because there are not many brewmasters playing this season, and this is why this spec gets a little bit bloated. It looks like he's logging really well, but it's because, as you can see if I mouse over, there's 22,000 parses as brew and 60,000 parses as frost, and that's the reason why the frost is logging less on points percent, right? So this is how you ignore this section and you actually focus on the key percent. And if you focus on the key percent, you can see that the Brewmaster is a good player. And so, what does this mean? If you are like, if you don't have much time to evaluate all of this and you have to look fast, you just go on a key, you go on deaths, you check if the DK has died. So he died once in the beginning, right? So he died at 3:30, right? So this is like what, second pull, which means that he blew his CDs on the first pack, so he did his damage. And beyond that, he didn't die. So there's no reason for him to log this low. No reason at all, right? He should be logging higher than this in the key percent. So the other thing that you have to look out for, which is very specific, and I don't often do this, but if I'm doing like a very high key and there's a person that I'm skeptical about, I'm not checking only the damage. The damage is like very good to check this, but I'm checking interrupts, for example. So he's a DK, and he interrupted 19 times. You can see the DH that has the same interrupt cooldown has interrupted nearly twice as much. So interrupts wise, this guy also did very bad. There isn't a specific parse for interrupts. There should be, honestly, but you can check the interrupts here, and you can see that he did not do so well here. Also, the other thing that I want to check, and this is a bit harder, you have to understand how defenses play out for each class. So for DKs, for example, what we're looking for here, give me only a second. You can see that if I scroll down, this is the damage buffs, right? If I scroll down to defensive usage, I can see how many Lichborns he pressed, how many MZs he pressed, how many IBFs he pressed, you know? There's so many things that you can press as a DK, and DK is honestly like unkillable. So you can see that this guy pressed AMZ twice in the key, and he pressed Lichborn twice as well, and Icebound 8. This is actually not bad for a key level 14. Now, when you're looking at this, it highly depends on the key level, because if the key level is too low, there really isn't a reason to warrant using defensives unless there's a very specific scenario. But you know, in this dungeon, for example, I'm not gonna be able to like think about a way, but using AMZ on the beginning here is very big, so he did do that. And he used it a little bit later in the key. So this AMZ probably went for the first AoE from the Giant on Gambit, and this is pretty good at usage. So defensives wise, for his key level, he's doing pretty well actually. You know, even though it looks like he didn't use much. Lichborn, for example, he just didn't press for the entire dungeon at all. Like he just pressed it twice, but still, like this is good enough. So you have to look at this if you're extremely like picky about who you want to choose, and that's it. So the main thing you want to look out for is you know, the key percent. The key percent is key to actually looking at logs. There's a lot of people in LFG that like to boast about their parses on Mythic Plus, but the caveat is people look at parses based on points gained when the key was finished, and they never actually filter the parses as damage. They filter the parses as points. So if I go to damage here, you can see like this is pretty bad as well, right? By the way, doing this, going to Mythic Season 3 and filtering as damage is not a good idea, because you can see that he logged bad on a 4, so this doesn't really count. And these other logs, they are, I think, I'm not sure, but do not trust these logs. You have to actually look into the logs and look at key percent, because key percent is the king, right? And there's another thing that I want to talk about. This is the last thing that I'm going to be talking about. If we go back to the monk that was in that key, so if I quickly go to Gambit and then I click over here, you can see that this monk, he logged 91, just like I said. But the thing about key percent logging is that if you are doing a key level 10 and you are 715 eye level, which is overkill for a 10, extremely overkill in fact, you are going to log a key percent extremely well. Why? Because you have more eye level, because you have more gear, maybe you have more IO, which means that you have more experience in the dungeon, so you know where to commit CDs. There's a lot that goes into key percent parses, but key percent on lower levels, on lower level keys, they are not worth checking, because the amount of parses in that specific key range is so much, and it's so far between, because people have different eye levels, that they're practically unusable to actually like learn if that person is good or not. However, in contrast, in higher keys, key percent is extremely good to know a person's damage performance, because logging really well on higher keys is much harder, because the eye level distribution is standardized mostly in higher keys, which means that people aren't fluctuating between higher levels. In a 10, for example, you would have people that are 690 versus somebody that's 715. I mean, come on, guys. A person that's 715 has 4 Ps, has everything. He's gonna do 1 billion damage, and the other guy is gonna do none. So That's expected. But on higher keys, everybody has the same eye level or close to it. You can see that the only not so geared person here was the healer. Everybody else was 713, and that's normal. You should invite people with decent eye level for higher keys. And because of that, it means that the scenario on higher keys, they are much more competitive, which means that people, these 1,000 parses that happen on this specific key level for brew, this guy was competing with people that actually tried to do damage, and still he came up on top in log 91, right? So key percent logs on higher keys are extremely valuable and extremely difficult to obtain. So if I actually go to my character right now, this is my main. So this is the character that I usually run keys with, and it's the one that I have most knowledge about how it actually plays out. If you go to my keys, you're going to be looking at logs and thinking that I'm insane with all these 99s. But the thing is, just like we talked about in the beginning, these are default to points. So above 15 key level, you're always going to log 99. So this is worthless. You never look at this, right? You could instead filter by damage. But the thing about damage is that it doesn't show you the full picture. So if I actually come back to the log here, the way that you would actually do this is the way that I taught you. So you would go into Arakawa, for example, here, and check a higher key. So you can see that this key I did 5.4 million DPS, right? So if I go here, I can see my key percent. My key percent was 95, which means that compared to everybody else on 16s, I was logging 95%. So I was above 95% of the completed runs as Prot Paladin. So I'm doing pretty well, and there's a lot of reasons why I logged so well, but let's not focus on this too much. The thing that you have to know is that on higher keys, the routes, they are standardized, which means that people, they're usually running the same thing with only small alterations between each route. So the damage becomes a little bit more streamlined. So people are doing the same profile, the same damage profile on that dungeon because it plays out exactly the same. And since the affixes are the same, there's no changes in between. So you are actually competing against yourself here. This is important because on scenarios like, key level 10s, you're not gonna have decent values there because people can mess up the route and do like the first spawn of the dungeon with lust. They can lust like 3 targets, and everybody's damage is going to be destroyed because of that. But looking at lower key levels is actually insignificant. You shouldn't be doing that at all. There's many reasons as to why, but mainly it's because everybody that's doing high keys, they have about the same eye level. As you can see, everybody here is between 712 and 716. So people are decently, on average, about the same. Because of this means that the key percent log, they are much more competitive, as I was talking with Brew. So logging very high means that you're actually performing well. I mean, there's other things that go into it. Maybe you have good trinkets, maybe your character has better stats. There's a lot that goes into it, but I mean, to simplify things, logging above 80 is massive on these high keys. So, if I was a DPS and I was looking at some tank that was logging 95 on Arakawa 16 to my 17 key, I would instantly invite them because they deal massive damage and they're performing very well on a lower key, on a 16 in this case. So this is how you can actually look at people and evaluate their damage profile. Obviously, to end this whole explanation and this whole video, damage isn't the only thing that goes into your class. There are some very delicate peculiarities between each class. For example, BM hunters, they can opt for a talent tree that is more focused on focus damage. So they funnel damage, not funnel, sorry. They have prio damage. They do a lot of damage to one target, but they can opt to do to have a different they can opt to have a different talent tree which boosts their AoE damage, and they do massive AoE damage compared to the build that was only doing compared to the build that was only doing riot damage. So because of this, you have to be very specific about inviting somebody, right? There's a lot of things that go into logging well, but the thing is that logging well usually is very simple, which means that isn't something that it's very hard, especially if the person has done the key multiple times. So you should be looking at consistency, you should be looking at their DPS numbers, their defensive usages, their interrupts. If you're very nitpicky about choosing people, then you would invite them. So this is it. I hope it helped, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.